So, hello, and we are here for a new podcast. This time is with John Simon, managing partner, Total Impact Capital. And we're here because we want to hear the point of view of impact investors when it comes to aid and development financing. So, John, can you please introduce yourself and your organization?
Yes, my name is John Simon, and I'm the founder and managing partner of Total Impact Capital. Total Impact Capital is an impact first investing firm that focuses on financing basic human needs such as healthcare, water, renewable energy, food in the developing world.
Great. Okay, so let's start with the question. You started Total Impact Capital 16 years ago, before blended finance was like a term most people used. What were you actually trying to solve? And then has the problem you tried to solve gotten any better?
So, blended finance wasn't a term 16 years ago, but impact investing was just becoming a term. Impact investing was actually coined at a conference in Bellagio 2 years before in 2008. And so, what we saw, myself and my co founders, was that there was a growing population of investors that were looking to not only get a financial return, but also achieve some social or environmental positive effect, positive externality, and that there were many social entrepreneurs out there in the world that had really wonderful ideas on how to make the world better through a business model of some sort or another. But there wasn't a lot of connective tissue between the folks who had the capital and those who had the ways to deploy it. And so that's how we envisioned Total Impact Capital initially, basically performing that intermediary function of bringing together capital that was looking for impact and opportunities to make a difference in the world.
Very good. Now, investors in general, they're trying to maximize returns. My understanding is that Total Impact Capital operates differently. You are trying to drive returns down as far as possible while still keeping investors engaged. Can you explain that logic for an NGO leader who has never pitched on investors before?
Yeah, well. So it's important to recognize that there are lots of different types of investors. Investors have lots of different types of investing objectives. I mean, obviously, there are some investors who want to take a lot of risk with the hope of getting a large financial return. There's some investors who want to be very conservative and get very steady, guaranteed returns. People who put their money in, say, U.S. Treasuries or U.S. municipal bonds. And we believe there's a significant number of investors, maybe not large in the grand scheme of things, but a significant number in terms of absolute dollars, who want to put their money into opportunities that really make a difference in the world. And some of those people want to put their money into opportunities that make a difference in the world and also receive at least a market rate return. Those are called finance first impact investors. The investors we work with want to basically maximize the impact they can make. And they want to make sure that the return is high enough that the opportunities can still attract capital and therefore be sustainable. But they're not interested in necessarily achieving a market rate return. They're really interested in maximizing impact with what we call sustainable returns.
Very good. Let's get into some example or specific case. You developed Azure Resource Capital vehicle with the Catholic Relief Services, and that investment vehicle is focused on rural water cooperatives in Central America. Walk me through how that works, because what I take from it is that the money was never really the problem. It was the technical work that made the money possible.
Well, the latter point that you said is absolutely right. So I would never say the money was never the problem. Money is always a problem. It's always a challenge to get capital. But the real challenge was making sure that these rural water cooperatives that were largely run by community volunteers were managed effectively and had sound infrastructure plans and sound collection policies and sound financial management such that they could absorb debt capital and be able to pay that back. And with the provision of the type of technical support that Catholic Relief Services was able to provide them, the 50 or so organizations we've supported with financing have not only been able to pay it back, but they've been able to pay it back with a 100% repayment rate, no defaults, no write-offs. And that's largely because before we ever make a loan, there's an analysis done to make sure that that loan that the payments on that loan will be affordable, not just for the entity, but for the community members themselves, and that you're actually investing that money in things that will create long-term value, and in many cases create short-term cash flow. So for instance, if you're investing in a energy efficient pump, that's going to reduce your electricity expense, which is one of the largest expenses that water systems have. If you invest in micrometers, you're going to be able to charge people for the water that they use, and therefore you reduce what's called non-revenue water, or water that's basically wasted. So there, part of the idea of marrying technical assistance with finance is technical assistance really ensures that the finance is going into the things that create the most value. And by doing that, it basically makes that financing much less risky than it otherwise would be.
Very good. So after more than $1 billion mobilized across a dozen vehicles, you must have a short list of signals that tell you early whether an NGO can actually do this. What are those signals, and what disqualifies someone immediately?
So what we really look for are folks within the organization who recognize that there needs to be different approaches. Doesn't mean that everything the organization does has to be changed overnight, but that there need to be different approaches to how the organization finances and scales and sustains its activities. And basically, we believe this from the moment we were started, that NGOs should be looking for ways to leverage private capital to scale and sustain their activity. But I think with the recent disruptions within the international aid world, it's now become obvious. And that if you're in the business of trying to help create development, you need to think about how to do that with other sources beyond just official donor assistance or private philanthropy. You need to think about mobilizing other sources of capital, and impact investment is, I think, the most obvious source of capital to do so.
Now, about mobilization, every organization you work with apparently had someone on the inside pushing for this type of opportunity. Someone perhaps frustrated enough with the old tools to start looking for new ones. How does a CEO identify that person who is willing to push for something new? And how do they become that person themselves if they're not already wired that way?
Well, usually that person is the one who's breaking a lot of rules. So one thing, if I were a CEO of an international NGO and I said, who's actually the type of person who can lead these types of initiatives, I say, who's the person who doesn't seem to follow the normal rules? I mean, within any organization, you tend to have two types of people: the people who follow the rules, and the people whose primary focus is following the rules, and the people whose primary focus is getting things done. And you actually need both of those people, right? Because if you only had the people who focus on getting things done, everyone would wind up in jail. But if you're trying to think about how you find the folks who really want to embrace this type of approach, really look at the people who are in that getting things done group, and who chafe at the existing rules, who are eager to think outside the box.
Okay, so NGO leaders often go into blended finance thinking it will solve their unrestricted funding problem. And boy, they have plenty of problems now with this. What's the honest conversation you have with them about what this model actually delivers and what it doesn't?
Yeah, so it absolutely does not deliver cash into the NGO to address their overhead and their unrestricted funding challenges. In fact, in most cases that we work with, the NGO has to take money from their unrestricted balances to seed the mechanisms that we're developing. The rationale for doing this is to basically create a financing source to sustain the activities beyond just going from one grant to another grant. That's, I think, the most compelling reason is, look, we're doing something that can generate revenues on its own. To do so efficiently, we need to do it at a larger scale. So we need to find capital beyond our typical grant that won't be allowed to be invested in sort of an investment model to scale this up and then sustain it on its own revenues and from capital from the private sector as opposed to going just from grant to grant. That's the main compelling reason. Now, it is possible, and there are examples that way into the future. I mean, Axion's investment in Carpatamos was an example of this. There could be a big return one way or another, but that's not the reason to do this. The reason to do this is to find another financing source to scale and sustain those things that can be sustained through market forces.
Okay, one more question. USAD is gutted. ODA is contracting across the board. I mean, the new data are coming every day, and it's worse and worse, the situation. For an NGO leader sitting at home, maybe watching this, thinking right now, I need to change something. Where do you tell that person to start? Maybe not the ideal path, but the realistic first step.
Yeah. Well, the first step is to really look at their portfolio of activities and identify which ones can support themselves through their own revenues, through basically customer payments, if you want, through user fees, as opposed to solely through grants, and then which of those would be an attractive proposition for investors. And so that's where I think you start, is you say, look, we do a lot of things around the world. Which one of those things really would be the low-hanging fruit in terms of having a business model that can be supported through customers and investors?
John, thank you for these insights. Is there anything we should have talked about and we haven't? Or is there anything you would like to say to the people, the community of NGO professional who are going to watch this and think about blended finance and think about your organization, how they should approach this opportunity, how they should think about this opportunity?
Well, I think every international non-governmental organization needs to do a stock taking in this moment and think about what they have, what assets they have that they can bring to the table for an impact investor or the finance community. And that includes the expertise they have in certain sectors. That includes the experience they have in certain types of enterprises. That includes their footprint on the ground. And it might include their own financial resources that they have if they have some sort of endowment. So I think it's a very scary time right now, and there's a normal habit to just look inward and not think about other ways of doing business. I think that's the exact opposite approach folks need to be taking. They need to be thinking about how they can access new sources of financing, how they can do business in new ways, and what is it that they bring to the table to do that. And I would argue that any international NGO that's been successful in the development space is going to have a number of those assets that they can bring to the table.
Great. John, thank you so much for these precious insights.